So welcome, Jeff, to the Sasin Demystified Podcast. It's great to have you. And you're at the end of your course here at Sasin.
Yes, thank you.
Well, we're very honored to welcome Jeff. He's from the great state of Hawaii. He started his professional career as a securities research analyst covering Japanese equities there in Tokyo. And you worked as a corporate finance lawyer, and you went to the United States and started up 3 companies in Silicon Valley, and then moved back to Japan and started up your own venture capital firm, JC Ventures, about 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, 20 plus years now.
And in the wake of that, you've started up, close to a couple of dozen companies?
Something like that.
So 10 years, Silicon Valley, some 30 some odd years in Japan. So how are things going so far in Bangkok?
Great so far. I've had a really fun summer here teaching at Sasin.
But it's not just Bangkok. You actually know the region fairly well. You're in Cambodia, you're in Bangladesh, you're in Singapore.
I travel a lot. So I'm typically on the road 3 weeks out of 4 every month. So I come to Thailand probably every other month, and I'm usually in Cambodia once a month. And travel the rest of the region as well. So yeah.
And you're working on interesting projects with SOGO. You're overseeing other startups that you're mentoring in the region. What I understand is that your understanding of startups, actually a lot of people's understanding of startups is that it's hard work, it's risky work. You don't believe that it's just up to a clever idea. You believe that it's, about falling in love with a problem. And you said in some interview that, when you get really pissed off at something, you're thinking, I got to do something about it, right? And so you built up several companies. I know that one is Trend Day in Japan. And was that built on something you were pissed off about?
I don't know if it rises to the level of being pissed off, but yeah, there was frustration there with climate change and everything that's going on. I thought I should put solar panels on my rooftop and start generating some renewable energy for my own house, my own needs. And in the process, learned how difficult it is to do that. And I thought, if it's difficult for me, no wonder why it's not spreading faster.
How many years ago was that?
Maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay. So what was the reason that you said, I've got to try this, I've got to do this? What was burning at you?
It was just the timing, I think. It was some hot summer day, and I was using a lot of power from the grid to cool the house down. And I just thought there's got to be a better way. I mean, in Japan, our electric utility is quite competent in the sense that we don't have a lot of power outages. But as a consumer, you have a choice of one.
Yeah.
So they've got a monopoly. Yeah. And I thought this made sense many years ago. But nowadays, with all these new technologies around, it no longer makes sense. And so I thought, what could I do to change that? And so I tried to look into putting solar panels on my own roof. And again, it was so much trouble to do it, and it was so complicated. And in addition to having to shell out a lot of money up front, there's just all these complexities and uncertainties. So I thought, if this is the case for me, it's definitely something worth tackling. And I thought other people will probably have a similar problem.
So it was a pain in the neck to put together, but in the end, was it worth it?
It's been great. I've had solar power at my house since 2018. And I know if there's a power outage for any reason during the daytime, that I can just flick a switch and switch over to my panels and have power. I feel better that I know that whatever I'm using, a big chunk of that is coming from the panels on my rooftop. It's just nice knowing that. And I just feel more in control of my own destiny that way.
Sure.
So yeah, I like it.
So you were able to do that for yourself, but you viewed that as a solution for a broader part of the community.
So actually, I gave up.
Oh, you did?
In a sense. I didn't, it was so much complexity that I didn't do it. And instead, I went out and recruited some friends to help me. And that is the genesis of the company. So I'm customer number one for Trendy. You know, my guys were climbing up on our roof, surveying to decide, you know, how many panels we could put up and all of that. So I learned the hard way.
So lesson number one, find out what you're pissed off about. Lesson number two is find other people who are pissed off for the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, other people who share the passion to solve that problem. Those are the best people to work with. And number one, you know, they're just excited about doing it. They're not joining because of a paycheck. So when the going gets tough, which it will, they're less likely to give up. And yeah, they're there with a common goal. So it's a lot more fun to work with those kinds of people.
So talk about the business model. How did you unite with your friends to decide how can we do this and make money out of it?
So actually at the time, I was at Tokyo Electric and I was heading up the innovation team there. We were in...
This is TEPCO.
TEPCO, yes, the owner of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So I had a team there that I was running that was in charge of innovation and corporate venture capital. But it just felt like this is something that, you know, if somebody else had already been doing it, I would have just invested in that. But unfortunately, I couldn't find anybody. And so I felt compelled to do it myself. So I talked it over with some of the people and ended up setting this up and actually leaving TEPCO to go and build this. Fortunately, they invested in the company. I took a few of the employees with me and yeah, away we went. So,
and TEPCO was okay with that?
They were the largest single shareholder in the company.
Oh, I see.
So they really, you know, they were instrumental in helping me get this up and running. And fortunately, we brought on some other shareholders to balance things out a bit. So Idemitsu, the second largest oil and gas company in Japan. We also brought on Dubai Electric and Water Authority as another big shareholder. And then since then, Itochu, the big trading company in Japan, has come in a big way. And they're really working closely with us to move this forward.
And how did you explain this to the customer? How did you sell? What product and service did you sell in this business?
So we've changed over time. In the very beginning, we were just trying to prove that we could buy and sell energy, that we could charge a customer and we could collect on it. So we started off with just energy retailing. We went out, got a retail license, and we went out, signed up customers, provided them with power, and charged them for it. Once we could do that, then we started this solar project where we started to offer some of the customers a really great deal, which was basically we would borrow their rooftop and we would, at our cost, go in and install solar and provide them with solar power during the day. And then at night, we would provide them power from the grid. And now we're pivoting away from actually providing power at night to focusing really on the solar.
How do you do that with storage?
So they've, the customers are now signing up a separate utility to provide them power when we're unable to provide. So we provide it during the daytime, I think, so that we can really focus on the solar component, the renewable component. And now we're starting to introduce battery storage as well.
That's to avoid the extra, fees that you'd have to pay
We would have preferred to have offered battery storage from the very beginning, but at the time it was just still too expensive. And even today, prices for battery storage have come down quite a bit, but they're still quite high.
As we know in today's world, over, I guess, estimates of 1 billion plus people who are struggling with so-called energy poverty, which means they lack access or consistent access to electric lighting, particularly after dark. Ability to cook with modern fuels. And so this seems to be particularly true in the global south. And for you, I assume this feels like a tremendous opportunity because you seem to be looking to areas like Bangladesh, like Cambodia, et cetera, et cetera. So the mission for SOGO Energy is building the distributed utility for the next billion. So if yes, so why do you think so? Why do you think this is a great opportunity?
We're gonna have to wordsmith that. That's definitely not working out. I'll have to come up with an easier tagline. But the idea here is that there are areas and there are populations which are really getting hurt by climate crisis. A lot of these locations and these people are the ones that had the least to do with creating this situation.
Right.
And they're also the least, they're in the worst position to try to remedy these things financially and whatnot. So I think of it, I mean, you could say it's an opportunity. So when I wear my entrepreneur hat, I look at it definitely as an opportunity. But I think deep down, it's almost like a moral imperative. I think it's a responsibility that other people hopefully will feel and share this kind of responsibility to help out and, to lend a helping hand to get things started and to try to right the wrongs.
Can you give an example of how you're manifesting that desire?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived a very privileged life. I grew up in the U.S. and in Japan. I've always had it quite easy. A lot of things that we take for granted. So you and I both, right?
Sure.
When we go home, we flick the switch on and the lights come on.
Right.
We expect that.
Right.
That's not the case in many locations. There are no lights to flick, no switch to flick. Or even if you do turn it on, chances are 50-50, they might not turn on.
Right.
So there are a lot of these places. And what I was looking to do was to lend a helping hand. But when we looked at this situation, I think we saw a lot of impact investors and whatnot who've gone in, or donor organizations, governments and whatnot. I'm just one guy. So,
right.
That's not the game that I can play.
What's the game that they're playing?
Well, I think a lot of it is just donations.
I see.
Right. Grant aid, right? Foreign aid. And that's great, but I think in many circumstances, that's not sustainable.
Right.
Right. I would rather go in and help build something that is more sustainable. So when we looked around, for example, we started off by looking at Cambodia because I go there frequently. I teach business school there as well. And I have a lot of friends there. So when we looked at Cambodia, initially we were thinking about energy access and going in and putting in renewable energy, generating it locally and distributing it locally. However, reality is that the government has a monopoly on energy there. It's very difficult to sell electricity. The only places where we could probably get a license to do so would be in very remote areas where the demand for the power is very low. So the cost of going and delivering it would be very high, even the demand is very low. So that's a very bad formula for profitability and scalability and sustainability. So we looked around and said, okay, what else could we do? And the one thing that caught our attention was irrigation. And in the case of irrigation, many of the farmers are using diesel-powered pumps,
right,
pump water from either the river or from a borehole.
So not so clean.
So very dirty, but also very expensive.
Diesel is expensive.
Diesel is expensive, and it's become even more expensive recently with energy prices going through the roof.
Right.
So that unexpected risk where prices are fluctuating and it's gone up creates additional risk to the farmers. And so we thought, what if we were to change that? And we found a local partner who was selling solar water pumps. So they were basically going to each of these farmers and trying to sell a pump that was powered by a panel,
right,
one or two panels. And we looked at that as well, and we thought, okay, that's a good start, but it really doesn't solve the problem because the farmer still has to buy all of this equipment up front. And so that reminded me of my situation in Japan, where the high capex, the high initial cost, meant that a lot of homeowners just decided not to do anything.
Right.
And so similar to the business that we built in Japan, I thought, okay, what if we were to go in and build a pumping station and we used solar power to power the pumps, but we sold water to the farmers instead? That should be much more accessible to them and lower risk for them. So that's what we're trying to do right now. We're in the process of trying to execute on this. We've built 2 pilots in Cambodia, working with our local partner there. And we are still troubleshooting on the technical issues, but hopefully I think we'll be able to solve those. And then we need to work on the business model to make sure that we can collect enough money to cover our costs, as well as to have a profit margin so we can scale this up and do not 2 pumping stations, but thousands of pumping stations.
So you're creating this water irrigation grid powered by solar energy, which you would make available to farmers for a fee.
Yeah, basically
they wouldn't buy the infrastructure, but they would just buy the water.
Correct. Yeah, they would buy the water as a service, and we would take care of deploying the CapEx to build these things out and then operate them. And I think in emerging economies like Cambodia, these new renewable energies, technologies are a good fit, actually, because they're very modular.
Right.
You can deploy, 5 kilowatts at a time. You don't have to go in and build a huge power plant.
Right.
To power this. And the power can be generated locally on site. And I think the other thing is just kind of the future, moving towards a future where energy is just the catalyst to replace and decarbonize a big portion of the economy. Things that up until now haven't been used, we didn't use energy for. Agriculture, construction, whatnot. And energy is actually being able to replace a lot of these inputs and help to decarbonize. So I think there are huge opportunities all over the world. Just depends, there's 24 hours in the day. So
that's true, but it feels like the mobile phone was what the mobile phone was able to do, leapfrog the whole landline infrastructure. It sounds like energy will be able to do that in a very distributed sort of way, hit areas that, won't ever get that huge energy infrastructure, but may be able to have their own distributed modular energy source through solar, perhaps.
I think the thing with the cell phones, with wireless, customers always thought, as soon as they saw it, they thought it was a better solution and they wanted it.
Yep.
With renewable energy, again, it still is much more kind of aimed at larger organizations because of the high cost. And so it's less of a consumer product. It still tends to be more of kind of a B2B or B2C product. So it doesn't have that cachet, I think. Like if I walk around with my mobile phone, people in Cambodia 20 years ago or 10 years ago, wanted it. Whereas if I show you solar panels, it's not like you want to run out and get it yourself for most people. I mean, I'm an energy geek, so I would, but the average person doesn't. So there's a difference, I think, there because of consumer products versus something that's more of a industrial product.
Okay, so then there aren't a lot of Uber-like businesses that are going to pop up in the energy space?
I think there are, actually. I mean, again, whether a consumer actually wants to run out and buy this themselves is one issue. But whether these technologies will flourish on a distributed basis is different. I think it will. I mean, Uber basically provided people who have cars with an additional way to make money,
right,
and to defray the cost of that car through driving, right, providing rides on demand. I think with energy, distributed energy, especially like solar, has that opportunity as well. So I might put in solar power on my rooftop, but I don't use all of that power in the daytime. I may use 30% of, if the panels produce, let's say 100%, and I only need 30 of that during the day. So they have excess. My neighbor who doesn't have solar panels could really benefit from the power that my panels are generating. So if, like Uber, we could open that up to them, then that would be a local source of power, just right next door. You don't need all those transmission lines. You don't need all that big infrastructure. And I've already sunk the cost.
Right.
So there's a huge benefit to sharing.
Peer-to-peer energy sharing.
Yeah.
Or selling or...
Sharing, yeah. Sharing of that, selling of it, buying of it, all of that.
Which makes sense in sort of remote communities, right?
It makes sense. It makes even more sense in urban communities.
Oh, of course, because you've got such concentration.
Exactly.
I was actually surprised to read in a recent New York Times article. I'm not as up on the renewable area as well, but I was sort of surprised at how much progress renewable energy has made. They're saying that it's going to be the largest source of global electricity generation by 2025. It's almost basically surpassing coal and natural gas as the number one energy source. So as these capital costs for generating renewable electricity continues to just fall, at least that's what the trend looks like.
Yep.
So some people say it's going to be free at some point. Like some people are saying by 2050, energy will be free. Do you agree? And even if you don't agree by the date, if it's going in that sort of descending trend, what does that mean for business opportunities going forward?
Sure. I don't think it will be free anytime soon, but we're definitely seeing massive cost reduction. But even when there's cost reduction, it's still, we're talking about massive global systems that need to be replaced. That's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen for free. So there's a lot of capital investments that need to be made to make this happen. It just so happens that when you calculate on a per kilowatt basis, the cost of producing that kilowatt continues to go down. I think one of the interesting things is both at supply and the demand side. So on the demand side, traditionally we've thought about replacing, or this kind of energy transition, replacing the electrons that we're producing today with fossil fuels and producing them with renewables. Actually, we need to produce a lot more, because we're not just replacing what we're currently using for electricity. We're actually coming up with new demands, new uses of electricity. We're using electricity to power many other things. For example, EVs.
Right.
Traditionally, you put gasoline in the car, and you've used that to power the car. And so we didn't calculate that into
or mining for cryptocurrency.
Mining for cryptocurrencies. Yeah, a whole nother debate. So all of these things are basically, we're seeing a huge increase in the potential or the expected demand for electricity. And renewables being able to fill that is a really interesting prospect, I think. So
it's like when telecoms say we're going from 3G to 4G, and you're going to have more 4G to 5G. You're going to be able to download those movies instantly, when in fact they're going to make it even bigger. You mentor so many people across the region, probably globally, but I know in the region you do, people who are in the startup world, in Asia, also here in Thailand, and would love to hear about some of those stories, the type of people you're mentoring and what their stories are like. If you can give a few examples of those stories of great startups.
I tend to think of through people rather than startups.
Right.
Because people can start multiple companies.
Right.
Maybe Vin is a good example. So Vin is a young Thai engineer who graduated from Chula, then went to the University of Tokyo to get his master's degree in computer science. He interned with me, I think like 12 or 13 years ago.
In Japan.
In Japan, yeah. And after coming back to Thailand, he worked for a bit at a consulting firm, and then he became a venture capitalist. I think I probably had some influence on him to pick that career. But he's an amazing guy. I know that he's one of the best venture capitalists here in Thailand in terms of his track record. But I think more importantly, in terms of the number of people he's positively impacted. So by mentoring him many years ago, I think he's then paid it forward and helped to mentor a whole generation of startup companies, entrepreneurs that have gone on to become successful here in Thailand.
What are one of the critical qualities for a good venture capitalist?
Patience. Again, I think most people want to say yes to help out others. But with venture capitalists, you really have to choose because you've got limited funds. And typically, if you invest in, say, 20 to 30 startups, you might be looking at several thousand companies to then pick those 20 or 30 startups.
Right.
So you're often, if not almost always, saying no to people. And that's really tough. But then knowing when to say yes, that's a real gift. I think it's not easy.
It's hard to identify in sort of analytical terms. It's more gut, or how would you analyze that ability to know what yes is?
Yeah, venture capitalists are famous for pattern recognition. But I think even when you do that, if you realize that, okay, they picked 20 companies to invest in. Out of those 20 companies, 19 are going to fail.
Right.
18 to 19 are fail. And one or two of the companies are going to return so much money that it recovers the whole value of the money they put in, plus all of the upside. So it's very different from typical investing. Typical investing, you have portfolio investment, diversification of risk, much more kind of that bell curve distribution. With venture capital, it's power laws.
Right.
So you're investing in, you look at 4,000 companies, you pick 20. Out of the 20, 18 fail.
Right.
And one does okay, and one does fantastic.
So that's what you mean by patient. It's like
patience.
You know you're going to have, you're not going to win on most of these things, and it's really a bet on, it's a belief that one of these are going to make up for all the others.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's really hard to figure out which one is going to be the one that saves you, that gives you that positive return.
Right, because if you're betting on all so-called winners, the risk is very low, and you're just managing a whole bunch of sort of mediocre companies.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people who are good at school are good at getting the correct answer all the time. And in the case of our job as investors, it's kind of funny because we know that we can be wrong every single time except once, and that being right one time is enough to be successful.
That whole idea, fail fast, learn from your failures. It's so intuitively hard for most people, right?
Yeah.
And because when people say, well, what are your weaknesses, what are your biggest failures, people just turn that around and really brag about something that's actually quite positive instead of really exploring a failure.
Yeah.
But in the venture capital world, you really have to embrace failure because that's really what you're going to get.
Well, failure in the sense of learning.
Right.
Yeah, you're learning through that failure. It's kind of that's just a learning process.
And so does that mean that are there certain cultures that are, because they're less they're more risk averse, then you're going to have fewer startups and fewer entrepreneurial ecosystems?
Yeah, I try to avoid the cultural explanation. I think that's an easy cop-out to answer. I think it also is generational. So, for example, one society that we might think of being very risk averse, that may be very true today. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they might have been extremely aggressive in being able to take on risk. And likewise, maybe 10 years from now, they'll be aggressive again. So I think it tends to be more generational whenever you've got a society that's had a lot of recent success. I think the next generation tends to grow up a bit more entitled and privileged, and therefore less hungry. So you probably will see less risk-taking, a smaller appetite for risk-taking. Although other cultures, even if they have had success, you might see a lot of immigration, for example,
right,
where maybe the establishment is quite protected and not hungry,
Right.
complacent, but you may see immigrants come in, and therefore that generation tends to be oftentimes the people who are still struggling and taking on risk and trying to do new things.
When, we look at Japan as not necessarily being a culture of entrepreneurs, but if I look back as a Japanese American on the history of Japanese immigration to America, when they moved to America, they were all entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They all ran their own businesses, mainly because they had
to. Yeah.
Right? So it's not necessarily in the blood. It's situational, perhaps.
Yes, I think that's a more accurate way of looking at it.
So Vin is patient and he is embracing risk. Any other examples of great stories of people that you've mentored?
Yeah, I mean, the other two people I can think of are very different. One is an American scientist who has built her whole career in Japan. She has been researching shrimp production, the whole production process, as well as indoor production, as well as breeding and all of these kinds of things. And I just have had the privilege of watching and learning from her for the past, I would say, maybe 10 years, and just being fascinated by what she's doing. And now she's in the process of setting up a new company to actually commercialize some of her technology. And she's...
What's the technology specifically? Or if you can't explain
she's got several different technologies, one on reproduction, some others on actually circulating water indoors so that, if it's an indoor situation, you can control many things much more accurately. So you don't have to put in, for example, a lot of these chemicals or whatnot that are added into outdoor shrimp farms tend to be very destructive. Even the feeding the shrimp, not being scientific, you put in too much feed into the water, it remains in the water, it dissolves, the concentration goes up. It's a waste of resources. And then when that water is released into the ocean, you have other problems because the water is super saturated with all these things. So her technologies enable the process to be much more sustainable, but also to increase productivity. And it's fun to work with her and to see her moving from being an academic and a researcher to starting to become an entrepreneur.
And for which there probably is a great need, understanding Japan and the region's great love for fish product, particularly sushi. I don't know if it would feed into the sushi pipeline, but all the shrimp gets is going to get consumed.
Yes,
and probably there's a market for environmentally created or organically created shrimp.
Yeah, definitely.
So, being obsessed is another quality.
Yeah,
for some entrepreneurs.
I think I would put it a little different. I would say being curious. I love learning about new things, and I love learning about different things, and that's served me well in my career, and it just makes life more interesting, I think. Yeah.
Well, now I know where to go, though, if I have a question about shrimp.
Yes.
And the third?
The third is a young gentleman I'm still working with right now. He was one of my students in Japan, even though he's from Cambodia.
Oh, I see.
And, after graduation, getting his MBA, he went on and joined a large Japanese company. And recently, he's joined me at SOGO.
Oh, I met him.
You met him. And he is spearheading our operations in Cambodia. And he's been a godsend. Number one, he can speak a local language.
Right.
He can talk directly with the farmers and understand their pain points, unfiltered, rather than me trying to understand through a translator. But he's got this great kind of can-do attitude, and it's been such a pleasure to work with. I'm really hoping that he will go on not just to make SOGO successful, but that he will do many companies going forward, and that he'll teach a lot of other people and have a positive influence on their lives as well. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. So it's that there's also this sort of problem-solving mindset.
Exactly. Yes. Then this problem solving, the empathy to understand the problem, to see it from the customer's viewpoint, even when the customer may not be able to enunciate it, but being able to understand it, verify it, and then to come up with a solution, right? Having the guts to go and build something that actually solves that. That's a non-trivial task. And so working with these kinds of people, whether it's Vin on the investment side or Marcy on starting a company or Sotia in getting the companies up and running, these are all like key positions that are necessary.
Right. And these amazing people you learn from as well.
Oh yeah. It's fun to work with them. I learned so much from them. It's great.
All right. Thanks again.